For those of you who do not know, the Northern Ireland War Memorial over the last number of years has been trying to compile a comprehensive and inclusive list of all the fatalities of the German air raids. It's a very difficult undertaking. You might think it's very simple, but it can be very difficult because there could be some people who died during an air raid of a heart attack, and you then have to determine, would they have had the heart attack without the air raid, or was the air raid a contributory factor? You've got people who died as an indirect consequence of the air raid. So, for example, in October 41, a 29-year-old woman who was working, who was the manager of a cafe in Fountain Street, was killed when she was at work. The building next door, which was the coach building, was being demolished, and 40 tons of masonry fell from the side of the building onto the room where she was working. So if there hadn't been the air raids, the building wouldn't have been being demolished. And if it hadn't been being demolished, then it wouldn't have fallen on her. So she's an indirect fatality or victim of the German air raids. So they're trying to build this comprehensive list. They've issued a list of names that they have, that they're secure in their knowledge that they qualify. But they've also put out a call for people who think that if they have any relatives who they think have been overlooked. So you could get somebody who maybe died in, say, 1942 of injuries sustained in the German air raids, and those factors would have to be taken in. So it's a huge undertaking, and I don't envy them the task, to be quite honest. One other, just a thank you to our sponsors. Back in 2018, History Hub Ulster produced this book. It's a selection of war memorials in Ulster. There's at least one war memorial from each county in Ulster, and they've been selected by me based on something within them that's a bit unusual. So, for example, the Larne Urban District Memorial features a Pickelbaum German helmet. The Portadown Memorial features a gas mask. So there's a number of sort of wee idiosyncrasies. Got some of these on sale here today for the budget price of £5, or you can get 2 books for a tenner. Okay, so I'm going to get started. Got quite a lot to get through, and I hope this is an area, brave conduct in civil defence. It's an area that hasn't really been tapped into in a lot of the books about the Belfast Blitz, or in some of the events and online stories that have been related. So thank you to PRONI for agreeing to host this. The title slide, the image in the title slide. I suppose I should stand next to the microphone. That might help. Does that help anyone? Yes. Yep. Nope. Oh well. The title slide comes from the Belfast newsletter dated 29th of November 1941, and it shows the Duke of Kent during a visit to Northern Ireland being presented to 3 recipients of the British Empire Medal, as well as ARP wardens and so forth. Right. The primary source of information for this topic is actually not held at PRONI. It's the Civil Defence Gallantry Awards records accessed via Ancestry. Whilst the catalogue can be searched by name, so if you know of somebody's name and you think they might have got a Gallantry or Bravery Award, you can search that way. But what I did was I just searched for people who lived in Belfast, on place of residence or whatever, and it came up with a list, and then I looked at each one to see what the conditions were. There's 20 people from Belfast who received what was termed brave conduct in civil defence. So 20 people, 3 received the George Medal. Now, in terms of civil bravery or civil gallantry, George Cross is the equivalent of a Victoria Cross, so George Medal is 1 step down from a George Cross. 9 were awarded the British Empire Medal, 7 were commended for their actions, and 1 person was made a member of the Order of the British Empire. Now, when we go through some of the actual citations, whenever I was going through them, I came to realise that some people who were commended, their actions, to me, seemed to justify being awarded a British Empire Medal. There were some people who were recommended for a George Medal, but were only given a commendation. And it just draws in how how the determination was made. None of them, some were recommended for the George Cross, none were awarded, because the George Cross stipulates that there must be a very real threat to the danger of the person performing the act of bravery. And they deemed that none of the situations in Belfast met that criteria. For anyone that does use Ancestry, I've put up the Search Collections reference, but if you just go on to Ancestry and look for Civil Defence Gallantry Awards, you'll find them. The records are held by case number, which could relate to more than one person, and we'll see that as we go through, and usually recorded details of the recipient's name, their civil occupation, their position in the war effort, and a summary of the reason for the award. The documents also included detailed reports on the incident for which the award was made, and then there would also be an official citation. And sometimes the official citation was a summary of the action report, or the report of the action that appeared in the case study papers. The official citations were published in the Belfast Gazette in 1941 and into 1942. And looking at them, this is an overview of the awards that were made. The youngest recipient was 15 years old, possibly still the youngest ever recipient of a British Empire medal. 2 other teenagers received awards. The oldest recipient was 50, and 2 other recipients were over the age of 50, and 3 of the recipients were women. So, as I said, sometimes there were one case study that covered more than one person. So this is a case study from 2 policemen from Leopold Street RUC barracks. They were both awarded the George Medal for after rescuing 8 people in Ottawa Street and 5 people in Ohio Street. So for those of you who aren't familiar, that would be the upper end of Shankill, Woodvale area. So Constables McCusker and Brett were engaged in extinguishing incendiary bombs when a high explosive bomb fell nearby, and they were buried by debris from falling buildings. Constable McCusker was blown through a door into a house. He managed to extricate himself and rescued a boy. Constable Brett joined McCusker and other men, though injured and suffering from shock, and began rescue work and continued until help arrived. The 2 constables displayed bravery and devotion to duty in the face of great danger and disregarded their own injuries until they had done all in their power to rescue the casualties. Tends to use the word casualties to cover both maybe dead bodies, but also rescuing people who were injured. William Brett was from Newtownards and had served in the Great War with 1st Battalion Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers, being wounded on 3 separate occasions and also being mentioned in dispatches. At the time of the award, he had 20 years service in the RUC, and he retired in 1944 and was also awarded the Defence Medal. William Brett died in March 1958 and buried in Mavilla Cemetery in Newtownards. Alexander McCusker was from Maguire's Bridge. He too had served in the Great War, this time with the 2nd Battalion Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers, and he was taken prisoner in March 1918 in the German Spring Offensive. He joined the Ulster Special Constabulary in 1920 and then transferred to the Royal Ulster Constabulary between June 1922 and March 1923. He retired in 1954 and was awarded the Defence Medal and the Police Long Service and Good Conduct Medal. He died in 1986, aged 89, and he's buried in Kirkhill Cemetery in Connor, so up your direction, John. The next 2 are constables Alfred King and Robert Moore, and they were both stationed at York Street RUC barracks, which was destroyed. No, sorry, it was York Road was destroyed, sorry. They received gallantry awards for their actions in Sussex Street and Vere Street following explosions at the York Street Flax Spinning Mill. The York Street Flax Spinning Mill, if you can picture it, ran from, I think it's now the Omniplex or something. It ran from York Street right the way back to North Queen Street. 4 stories high at the front, 6 stories high towards the rear. It was the largest spinning mill in the world at that time. The citation is, or the description: a 6-story building was hit by bombs and collapsed onto some small houses. Many people were injured and trapped, and a police squad was sent to help with rescue operations. Constable Moore dug away debris and sawed through planks and rescued a man and his wife and child. Later, with Constable King, he went to a house where people were trapped. They saw a hole in the debris, which had apparently been the stairway to the top of the house, but the stairway had collapsed, and the walls on both sides were about 3 feet apart, and they were cracked and likely to cave in at any moment. Although warned of the danger, Constable King volunteered to descend, and by his efforts succeeded in bringing the casualties to safety. Constable Moore then went to another house which had been wrecked and helped to release a woman from under a beam. He dug down about 6 feet and found a girl aged about 11 years. Her clothes were on fire. The constable got her out of the flames and extinguished the burning clothing with his hands, sustaining severe burns whilst so doing. Got to keep the grammar right. Constable Moore showed outstanding gallantry and total disregard of personal safety, and with Constable King was responsible for saving many lives. One of the rescues described occurred at number 74 Vere Street. So very difficult to get a grasp nowadays, because all those streets have disappeared. Basically, Sussex Street, Vere Street, Grove Street, Earl Street, they're all now part of a car park at the Cityside Retail Centre. But 74 Vere Street was one of the sites where Constables Moore and King carried out their rescue. It was the home of the McSurley family, and Sarah McSurley, 10, and Anne Philomena McSurley, 8, died in the house, whilst Mary McSurley, 12, was seriously injured at her home and later died at the Mater Hospital. It was Mary, when it says in the citation that he dug down about 6 feet and found a little girl aged about 11 years, that was Mary, who subsequently died. Robert Moore was recommended for the George Cross, but was awarded the George Medal because the authorities deemed that the description of his actions didn't quite meet that level, that he was in personal danger of dying. Going into a building where there's masonry collapsing all around, to my mind, meets that criteria, but I'm not the one that was making the decisions. But sometimes when you compare the different citations, you think, well, why did that person get a British Empire Medal and that person get a George Medal? Sometimes they just don't seem to gel. At the time of the award, Robert Moore had 19 years service with the Royal Ulster Constabulary and was 43 years old. He was also a recipient of the Defence Medal and the Police Long Service and Good Conduct Medal. He retired from the police in 1960, but with a name like Robert Moore, it's very difficult to try and identify when he died. Alfred King was 36 years old in 1941, and he had 17 years service with the RUC when he was awarded the British Empire Medal. He was also a recipient of the Defence Medal and the Police Long Service and Good Conduct Medal. Alfred was a member of the Young Citizens Temperance Royal Black Preceptory 387, and he retired in 1965. He died suddenly at his Torrance Crescent home on 17th December 1979, aged 70, and is buried in Carnmoney East Cemetery. Slightly easier name to search for references. Both of them are wearing medal ribbons at the time that they met. Was that the Duke of Kent? It's either Duke of Kent or King George, can't remember. But they're both wearing medal ribbons. Either they had already received the ribbon for the awards that they had been allocated, or those are Great War medals. But at the same time, I haven't been able to find references to an Alfred King or a Robert Moore as serving in the Great War. So that's why I haven't included any details. Apologies for the absolutely atrocious photographs on this one. It's the best I could find. Detective Sergeant Dennis Michael Kremen was stationed at Springfield Road RUC Barracks, and he was 45 years old and had over 24 years service in the police in 1941. He was born at Castle Island in County Kerry and served in the RIC from 1916, transferring to the RUC in 1922. It's strange that a Roman Catholic from County Kerry, he was stationed in Belfast when the RIC was, disbanded, thank you. I was going to say demolished, but that didn't sound quite right. He was stationed in Belfast, and I would have thought he would have gone back south and joined the Garda Síochána, but he decided to join the RUC instead in 1922. He was stationed at York Street RUC Barracks when he died at his Chief Street home on 27th December 1948, age 53. He's buried in Milltown Cemetery. There's no gravestone, no marker at his grave, although I believe that an RUC historical society or somebody involved in them is looking at getting permission to place something at the grave just to acknowledge it. Citation for his action. As a result of a direct hit by high explosive bombs at houses in Eastland Street, which is Shankle Road again, completely demolished, leaving a large crater filled with water, Sergeant Kremen at once undertook the duty of organising a rescue party, and with great difficulty a man and woman were extricated from the wreckage. Returning to the crater, the sergeant wormed his way in through the gable end of a house, and groping in the darkness he came upon a woman. She was trapped, but he managed to free her and get her out alive. Sergeant Kremen continued his work, and by his prompt and courageous action was responsible for rescuing 5 people. One of the people houses that he rescued the woman from was 49 Eastland Street, and two women from number 59 Eastland Street, and a man and a woman from 69 Eastland Street, the Houston family. So they were all people that he rescued. The houses at 49 to 59 Eastland Street were either totally destroyed during the German air raids or were so badly damaged that they had to be demolished, which gives an indication of sort of what the scenario, I mean, we can talk about it now, but trying to picture what it was like at the moment. You're going into a house and you don't know how structurally sound it is. I'm not sure that many people would do that nowadays. So those are all policemen, 5 policemen who gained civil defence gallantry awards or bravery awards. I'm not quite sure how you would draw the distinction between a gallantry award and a bravery award, but one seems to be used mainly for military and the other seems to be used for civil bravery. 2 members of Civil Defence Service D District were awarded the British Empire Medal for their actions at Cliftonville Road on the night of 16th April 1941. Bombs destroyed a number of houses and fractured a gas main. Ford and Bennett, these 2 chaps here, Bennett is in the uniform of the Auxiliary Fire Service, which he joined later after he left the ARP service. Burrowed their way under the debris and working in a prone position made a tunnel 6 yards long. They reached an elderly man who was trapped, and by taking the weight of the debris on their backs, they managed to extricate him. They then climbed through a hole in a partially destroyed staircase and after clearing away debris, succeeded in bringing 2 women to safety. During this time, bombs were continually falling and there was also a danger from collapsing wreckage. Ford and Bennett showed courage and devotion to duty, and both suffered from the effects of inhaling coal gas, which can cause death. It was a poisonous gas, and if you inhale too much of it within an enclosed area, it kills you. William John Ford, 51, was the caretaker of the model school on Cliftonville Road, and he was a bomb identification officer with the air raid precautions. He was recommended for the George Cross, but was awarded the British Empire Medal, so his allocation dropped down 2 levels. William was living in Finnicky when he died at Belfast City Hospital on 16th June 1957, aged 66, and he's buried in Knockbreda Cemetery. William Ernest Bennett of 29 Clifton Park Avenue was a pupil at Belfast Royal Academy. He was 15 years and 9 months old during the air raids. He was an ARP warden's messenger, so basically he would have been on his bicycle going between the different stations and between the headquarters and the ARP wardens and volunteers who were out in the carrying out rescue work and whatever. He was recommended for the George Medal, but it was dropped down to the British Empire Medal. Again, in this photograph, we have another image of William Ernest Bennett in his auxiliary fire service uniform. But the other two people in this are Samuel Campbell and Denise Forster, Civil Defence Services in E District. They were based at the Hollywood Road Ambulance Depot, which the location of that I haven't been able to determine because it was destroyed in 1941. So it doesn't appear in the 1941 street directory because it hadn't been set up, and it doesn't appear in the 1942 because it was no longer there. So they were awarded the British Empire Medal for their actions at the depot and after it was destroyed at nearby Ravenscroft Avenue, where I think something like 20 odd houses and a school were destroyed. Samuel Campbell, 45, was a veteran of the Great War and lived at 64A Douglas Street, where he ran a fruit and veg shop. He was a stretcher bearer with the British Red Cross and was recommended for the George Medal but awarded the BEM for leadership and devotion to duty at Hollywood Road Ambulance Depot in Ravenscroft Avenue on the night of 4th, 5th May. Mr. Campbell was on duty at his depot when it was demolished by a high explosive bomb which trapped him in the debris. On being released, and though badly shaken, he organised a first aid party and continued to lead them throughout the night, doing splendid work at several incidents. He showed initiative and courage, and his fine leadership was an inspiration to all who worked with him. So he wasn't an ARP warden, he was just a stretcher bearer with the ambulance service. And in the photograph that was in the newspapers, you can just see the 3 medal ribbons from the Great War: a Star Medal, British War Medal and the Victory Medal. Denise Patricia Forster was born on 7th July 1918 at Bryansburn Road in Bangor to James Edmund Cowan Forster, a linen manufacturer and possibly part of the Forster Green family. But I haven't been able to bottom that out. But certainly it's a very unusual spelling, Forster rather than Foster. And his father was a linen manufacturing merchant and his mother was Annie Cockey. Denise was an auxiliary nurse and was living at 20 Knockeden Park off the Knockbreeder Road in 1941. She too was recommended for the George Medal but was awarded the British Empire Medal for rescue work and devotion to duty at Hollywood Road Ambulance Depot in Ravenscroft Avenue on the night of 4th, 5th May. And again, part of the citation for her is very similar to the one for Samuel Campbell because they were both in the same location. When an ambulance depot was demolished by a high explosive bomb, Nurse Forster and many of the personnel were buried in the wreckage. Extricating herself with difficulty, she immediately began to release others. Later, she volunteered to go with an ambulance on a particularly dangerous journey through an area which is being heavily attacked by high explosives and incendiary bombs. That would be Ravenscroft Avenue and Bloomfield Avenue. The rope works on that night was basically demolished because when you've got a lot of silk and rope and incendiaries fall in them, it doesn't take much to imagine what the consequences are. Nurse Forster continued to work in the greatest danger throughout the night, refusing to be relieved, and only ceased her activities when ordered to do so some hours after the raid was over. So an obstinate woman, eh? Where would you find one of them in Belfast? That's Samuel, the case study for Samuel Campbell, which just shows details of his age, his position within the civil defence, his address, a very tight summary, and then who made the recommendation and so forth. That's another photograph of Denise Patricia Forster, auxiliary nurse, possibly taken in Bangor. as that's where she was born. Bruce Graham, Civil Defence Services G District. He lived at 29 Hopefield Avenue, was 24 years old, educated at Belfast Royal Academy, and was a self-employed automobile engineer with premises at 229 Shore Road. He was a motorcycle dispatch rider and was awarded the BEM for conspicuous bravery and devotion to duty on the night of 15th, 16th April. During an enemy attack on the night, telephone communications between the report centre and services were put out of action. Graham maintained contact by carrying operational messages on his motorcycle, notwithstanding the fact that high explosives were falling on the district and the roads were obstructed by craters and debris. Graham was several times blown off his machine by bomb blasts. On one occasion, his cycle became entangled in a mesh of fallen wires, and though the bombs were falling on nearby property, he disentangled his machine amid a shower of falling debris. Though exhausted from his efforts, he insisted on continuing to carry messages throughout the night. And it's not just the bravery aspect of it, but it's in a situation where he was probably physically exhausted. And it's the same for which keeps coming through, that even though they were wounded, even though they were injured, they carried on. Exhausted, riding a motorcycle would have put his life in danger, but he felt it was better for him to continue with his duties and potentially help to save people's lives rather than say, no, flip, I've had enough, I'm away home. Harold McKee, the District G Communications Officer, stated, outstanding amongst the cyclists was, by universal opinion, Mr. Bruce Graham. We were getting it very hot, and Graham was sent to reinforce the report centre staff. When it is remembered the number of bombs dropped and dropping on the roads when he had to cover, his coolness and magnificent courage in doing this with notable speed, and returning back asking for more messages, and this will be appreciated. The BEM ribbon was presented to Bruce Graham by Councillor Percival Brown, Chairman of the Belfast Civil Defence Authority, at an entertainment held at the Husband Memorial Hall on Frederick Street. And that event was held on the 9th of October 1941. Mr. John Clark McDermott, KC, from the Ministry of Public Security, was present at the event, and he later went on to become Lord Chief Justice for Northern Ireland. I love this photograph. It's not great quality, it's from newspaper, but still, I just think it's a fantastic photograph. Alexander Cecil Hill of 21 Convention Street, which I think is Ballymacarrat. He was the son of Samuel James Hill and Jessie Topping. He was employed as an office assistant by Osborne Cook and Company, accountants and auditors of Donegal Square West. And he was a patrol leader in the 43rd Scout Troop based at McQuiston Memorial Presbyterian Church. His father was a storekeeper at the ARP headquarters and a member of St. John's Ambulance Brigade. A brother, Jim, aged 19, was in the bomb disposal squad, and Alexander officially joined the ARP precautions as a warden's messenger in 1939. Note, officially joined. He was already doing in the ARP, but in an unofficial capacity. He was 17 years and 6 months old when he was recommended for the George Medal for traffic, direction and devotion to duty with ARP Post 43 on the night of 15th, 16th April. He was awarded the British Empire Medal, and the citation was published in the Belfast Gazette on 26th September 1941. Although severely shaken by the explosion of a high explosive bomb, Messenger Hill immediately posted himself on the main road and directed traffic whilst bombs were still falling nearby. Later, when the raid had increased in intensity, he was sent with an urgent message to the report centre. During the journey, he was twice blown off his bicycle by the explosion of bombs, but each time remounted and eventually delivered his messages. Although obviously suffering from his experiences, he refused to remain at the report centre and returned to his ARP post, where he continued to give splendid service throughout the night. That's another photograph of Alexander Cecil Hill when he was presented with the BEM ribbon, again by Councillor Percival Brown, Chairman of the Belfast Civil Defence Authority. This was at an event in East Belfast in September 1941, and in this newspaper picture, Alexander is being congratulated by Lady Jessie Muriel Bates, wife of Sir Richard Dawson Bates. When asked about the night of the raid, Alexander said, "It was just a job of work. I went out on my bike as I always do." And that gives an indication of the attitude of these people that were doing ARP duties, and their involvement, their actions have been grossly overlooked in sort of the whole history of the German air raids. I don't have a photograph for Nathaniel Nelson, so this is his case study. So again, senior warden, since promoted to group warden, Hanover Street in Belfast, bricklayer's labourer, rescue of a man trapped in a burning building at Old Lodge Road, and who recommended, and then a copy of the report by sub-district warden. He was born on 29th April 1900 to John Nelson, a blacksmith, and Anne Jane McElwain, and the family lived at Lawnbrook Avenue in 1911. In 1941, as it says, he was a bricklayer's labourer and was living at Hanover Street. He was a senior ARP warden at Denmark Street's post, and he was later promoted to group warden. Nathaniel was awarded the British Empire Medal for rescuing a man trapped in a burning building on the Old Lodge Road. Do people know where the Old Lodge Road was?
I lived on it.
Sorry?
I lived on it.
Did you? Yeah. Right, tell us where it was.
You have the jail that they use now, and then you have the old courthouse.
Yep.
Well, behind the old courthouse, the houses are built long ways now, but they were long houses, 3-storey houses. In fact, I live facing the Commons, and we live in a similar house now.
Right.
But that's where it was, and it went for right on down, halfway down, because you could walk right down into the town from the old.
So basically, it ran from what's now the junction of Agnes Street and Crumlin Road, diagonally down to where Peters Hill.
Yeah.
Coming out just below Townsend Street.
Yeah.
Yep. It's one of the streets which have been lost over the years, and people think, oh, well, if it's the old Lodge Road, it must be close to where the new Lodge Road is. But no, it was in a totally different part of Belfast. Not far away, but a different part. Okay. The citation: on the night of 16th April, a public house was set on fire by incendiary bombs. All persons, with the exception of a 70-year-old labourer, were safely evacuated. The man was so badly frightened that he refused to leave his room in the attic. So it was a pub, but there were people lodging in the rooms above the pub. This man was, so although the fire was rapidly spreading in his direction, Warden Nelson, on being told about this, made his way through the thick smoke up the staircase, which was alight, and eventually succeeded in bringing the man down to safety. Probably had to knock him out before he could bring him down. Shortly after, the whole building was gutted by fire, and there is no doubt that the man would have burned to death but for the prompt action of Warden Nelson. By looking at the Belfast street directories, I think that the building from which the man rescued was a public house owned by Samuel G. McFarland and was located at the junction of the Old Lodge Road and Hanover Street. And again, Hanover Street's probably gone now as well.
And that would have been then on where you have the old courthouse.
Yep.
We're at the back of the old courthouse. That would have been just on the far side.
Right, so it would have been basically behind the courthouse.
Yeah.
So that's what he got the British Empire Medal for rescuing a man from a pub. Probably stopped to have a quick Guinness on the way up. John Shaw of the St. Ambulance Brigade. He was 46 years old and lived at Ard Green and Gardens, and he was an electrical foreman at the Belfast Electricity Department, where he was divisional superintendent for the St. John Ambulance Brigade. So basically, that department, that institute, or that organisation had its own St. John's Ambulance Brigade company or whatever. This is the only case in which the recommendation was updated or uprated. John was recommended for a commendation for his devotion to duty at the Belfast Electrical Power Station on the night of 5th May, but he was made a member of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, and the citation was published in the Belfast Gazette on 10th July 1942. On the night of 5th May, an exceptionally heavy enemy attack was made on the Belfast Electric Power Station where Mr. John Shaw is employed. Directly the attack developed, Mr. Shaw manned all the first aid posts with members of his division of St. John's Ambulance Brigade and taking over the supervision of all the St. John's ambulance men available. So there might have been men who worked in the power station, but they belonged to St. John's Ambulance Brigade divisions in other parts of Belfast. But he brought them all together and made them into one unit. He saw that all casualties were properly attended to, treating the more seriously injured himself, after which he then had them removed to the first aid post and thence to hospital. With high explosive and incendiary bombs crashing continually over the power station for almost 5 hours, Mr. Shaw moved around the workshops with the greatest calmness and courage. His bravery and capable handling of the situation brought confidence and courage to all the employees in the building, preventing any semblance of panic, which no doubt contributed to the comparatively small number of casualties. It is considered that Mr. Shaw's example was the means of saving many lives. John Shaw was invested with the MBE at Buckingham Palace on 19th February 1943. He died at the Royal Victoria Hospital on 21st June 1950 at the age of 54 and was buried in Dundonald Cemetery 2 days later. The biggest drop between a recommendation and award related to George William Otway Woodward, who was born in Belfast on 28th January 1924, to Harry Greville Woodward, who is a stockbroker, and Alice May Foster. The family was living at Glenburn Park, which is off the Crumlin Road, just above Ardoyne, and George was head boy at Belfast Royal Academy, where his mother was a governor. I'm not saying that his mother being a governor was why he was made head boy, but I'm just throwing that out there. George was a warden's messenger, and he was recommended for a George Medal for devotion to duty on 15th-16th April, but he only received a commendation. And the citation was published in the Belfast Gazette on 26th September 1941. And you probably won't be able to read it, but citation is a summary of that. During a heavy raid on the night of 15th-16th April, telephone communications were dislocated at an early stage of the attack, isolating the report centre from the action station. So basically, within the ARP, you had a headquarters for each ARP post, but then you would have men out at different stations throughout their particular district. They were in telephone communication, but with all the telephone lines coming down, no mobile phones in those days, so the only way of communicating between the reporting centre and the action centres or the action points was by messenger, generally on, sometimes on motorbikes, but generally on push bikes. Pardon me. Messenger Woodward, during the whole of the exceptionally heavy attack on his district, carried messages of vital importance again and again, and although fully aware that his chances of reaching his destination were slender, he carried on until his cycle was put out of action, and then he continued to take messages on foot. The continued operation of the ARP services in the district was to a great extent due to the splendid perseverance shown by this lad. Now, on reading that citation, to me, I think at least a British Empire medal. George Woodward went on to become the Emeritus Professor of History at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, and he died at Christchurch in New Zealand on 12th May 2005, aged 81. So, not bad from a wee lad from off the Crumlin Road. Not that there's anything wrong with the Crumlin Road, I hasten to add. This photograph is from the Northern Ireland War Memorial website, and it's a photograph of post AF6 of the Auxiliary Fire Service. 3 members of the Auxiliary Fire Service from this post were commended for devotion to duty at Royal Avenue during the Easter Tuesday air raid. in an incident in which 2 of their comrades died. The 2 fatalities were George Spence, who was 17 years old, and Hugh Parkhill Castles, who was 33. The citation for John Walsh was published in the Belfast Gazette on 4th September 1942. John Walsh lived at Great Northern Street, and he was a tram driver with Belfast Corporation Transport. During the enemy action on night of 15th, 16th April, Mr. Walsh was driving in a car, which implies that he was the driver, but it should be he was a passenger in a car, but this is the way the citation. Driving in a car with trailer pump attached along Royal Avenue when a bomb exploded, severely damaging the car, killing one of his crew outright, and injuring another who died later the same day. The remainder of his crew were severely shocked by the blast, and Mr. Walsh was injured by bomb splinters and splinters from nearby buildings. As soon as he had sufficiently recovered, Mr. Walsh and Mr. Rainey procured an ambulance for the injured man, took the pump off its trailer as one of the wheels was damaged, and carried it down York Street and commenced work at the fires to which they had been originally sent. He continued to work late the following day. Only then did he have his own injuries attended to. Now, it's not clear exactly whereabouts on Royal Avenue the bomb exploded. My gut feeling is it was round about the Belfast Central Library and the Belfast Telegraph Office. My reason for that is that there are marks on the Belfast Telegraph building which show shrapnel marks, and there's also a brass plaque there to say that these pock marks were the result of bombs exploding during the German air raids. So it's easy to put 2 and 2 together and possibly get 4, but possibly get 5. They were being sent to attend York Street railway station, which again was gutted during the German air raids. A joint citation was placed for leading fireman Rainey and fireman Lee, and it was published on 20th February 1942. And again, a lot of the details overlap, but I'm still going to read out the full citation. During the enemy raid on night of 15th-16th April 1941, Mr. Lee was driving in a car with trailer pump attached along Royal Avenue when a bomb exploded, severely damaging the car, killing one of the crew outright and injuring another who died later in the day. The remainder of the crew, Messrs. Rainey, Walsh and Lee, were severely shocked by the blast, one of them being injured by splinters, so that would be Mr. Walsh. On recovering from the effects of the blast, Mr. Rainey assisted in taking the pump off its trailer as one of the wheels was damaged, helped to carry the pump along York Street and commence work at the fires to which they had been sent in the first place. So it's almost an identical citation, but just changing the names around here and there. This is Robert Clyde Rainey and James Jemison Lee. This photograph comes from the Northern Ireland War Memorial website. Leading fireman Robert Clyde Rainey was born on 31st January 1901 at Cambrai Street to James Rainey, a carpenter and builder, and Sarah Rainey née Clyde. He married Ethel Carson on 22nd June 1927 at Malone Presbyterian Church. In 1941, Robert was a self-employed radio trader and was living on the Lisburn Road, where his brothers ran a grocery business. So basically there were 2 shops. He did his radio stuff, radio sales, but it was also fruit and veg or grocery business. Robert of 402 Lisburn Road died at the Musgrave and Clark Private Nursing Home on 17th October 1961, aged 60. He left effects of £2,410, just under £46,000 in current terms, so he must have sold quite a few radios. And he left that to his widow and his daughter, Mrs. Margaret Josephine Young, and his son, James Clyde Rainey, a bank official. James Jemison Lee was born on 28th February 1914 at Park Road in Portadown to Samuel Lee, a bread server. In other words, in those days, and in fact right up until the 1970s, possibly the 1980s, a bread server was a man who drove a van round an area selling bread from the back of the van. You probably remember that. Do you remember that, John? And, you know, they were characters because he pulled up and it was like the ice cream van coming. Oh, the bread's here. Anyway, and his mother was Hessie Jemison. He was a salesman when he married Muriel May Connolly on 7th June 1939 at Osborne Park Methodist Church, and they lived at Ulsterville Gardens. In 1957, James was a section leader in the Lisburn Auxiliary Fire Service, so he continued to be a member of the Auxiliary Fire Service after the war, well after the war. He was awarded the newly instituted Civil Defence Long Service Medal in 1961, and that is this medal here. So on the reverse of the medal, it's got a shield for AFS, Auxiliary Fire Service, CD for Civil Defence, and I can't make that out from this angle. LIHR, National Health Service Reserve, I think that is. The medal was bestowed for 15 years continuous service in a variety of different organisations, including the Civil Defence Corps, the Auxiliary Fire Service, and the National Hospital Service Reserve, and also the United Kingdom Warning and Monitoring Organisation. So I'm assuming that was something to do with detecting either enemy activity, in other words, by this stage Russian, or looking out for incoming ballistic missiles. James Jemison Lee died at Belfast City Hospital on 23rd January 2000, aged 85. I came across this photograph of the Ulster Hospital for Children and Women on Templemore Avenue. It says that's what it is in the caption, so I can only believe that to be true. But it doesn't look like something you'd find on Templemore Avenue. With so much grounds around it. But anyway, after the Easter raid, the Ulster Hospital was evacuated to Whitehall Parade, but the building continued to be used as a casualty clearing station. 3 members of staff at the Templemore Avenue Casualty Clearing Station received commendations for devotion to duty, firefighting, etc. on the night of 4th, 5th May. These are the 3 people in question. They were Matron Eleanor Elizabeth Aiken, Radiographer Isabel Margaret Dixon, and Honorary Surgeon Robert John McConnell. The awards were made on the basis of a statement submitted by the President of the Ulster Hospital, Major J. Maynard Sinclair, who would die in the Princess Victoria tragedy in 1953. So 52 or 53. Right, consensus of opinion, 1953. And he said, "The best tribute I can pay is that if I again have to suffer a night such as May 4th, 5th, then give me Mr. McConnell and the nursing staff of the Ulster Hospital to do so with." He wasn't very good at grammar. On 15th April, on 15th April, the hospital was struck by high explosive bomb, which wrecked the boiler house and cut off light, gas and water. That within half an hour the hospital was functioning again as an efficient unit was due to the coolness, courage and tireless energy displayed by the matron in bringing into effect the emergency measures she herself had arranged. So in advance of the air raids, the matron had determined what needed to be done in an emergency if the electricity was cut off or whatever. And when it happened, she sprung into action. On 5th May, when the hospital was burned out, she not only organised firefighters, over whom she would have had no authority whatsoever, but also the saving of valuable and irreplaceable equipment. Throughout both raids, Miss Aiken worked unceasingly, often at great personal risk. Her unselfish devotion to duty was an inspiring example to all and was reflected in the excellent work and morale of her whole staff. This citation relates to both Matron Aiken and Radiographer Dixon. As the raid became more intensive, the members of the nursing staff were advised to take refuge in the shelter, but Miss Aiken and Miss Dixon refused to leave their posts. Later on, incendiaries fell and set fire at one point to the rafters and beams. Miss Aiken and Miss Dixon were instrumental in keeping the fire under control until the building was struck by bombs and staff were forced to evacuate due to the area being in flames. Although Miss Dixon had not fully recovered from a severe injury during the raid on 15-16 April, she continued to attack the fire in the upper story of the building and was the last of the nursing staff to leave. Her calmness, courage and devotion to duty on this occasion are worthy of the highest commendation. So that's what the two women got their commendation for. Mr. McConnell's cheerfulness throughout the incident and complete disregard for his own personal safety on several occasions greatly stimulated the staff working under conditions of grave danger. His leadership was of the highest praise. Now, to me, when you read or hear those two citations, they don't balance up to being of equal value. McConnell's seemed to be more stiff upper lip, keep going, chaps, that sort of thing. Whereas the two women actually got on with doing stuff. Always the way. So looking at these three people in a wee bit of detail. This is Matron Eleanor Elizabeth Aiken. That badge there is this badge here, which is the Royal College of Nursing badge. And this insignia is the Royal Red Cross. No, it's not. It's an MBE. Eleanor Elizabeth Aiken was born on 19th September 1903 to Robert Aiken and Mary Aiken, who farmed land at Tullynahinian near Port Glenowin. She trained at the Royal Victoria Hospital and undertook her midwifery training at the Royal Maternity Hospital in Glasgow. She served at the War Memorial Hospital on the Isle of Arran, later at Banbridge, and at the Princess Mary Maternity Hospital in Newcastle upon Tyne, before being appointed as matron at the Ulster Hospital for Children and Women in 1938. Eleanor was made a member of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire in the 1962 New Year's Honours List and retired from nursing in October of the same year. Miss Aiken died on 7th June 2001, aged 97. I think that's a great photograph of her, nicked off the internet. Isabel Margaret Dixon and Jean Cooper Dixon were both born on 4th April 1908 to Alexander Dixon, a nurseryman, and Isabel Margaret Petty, and the family was living at Ballyhanwood near Newtonards in 1911. Both twins went into the medical profession, and they were living at Abbey Road in Dundonald when they retired in 1968. Isabel trained as a nurse at the Ulster Hospital for Children in Queen Street. It was later an RUC building, so it's just up from, or it's just beside what's now, I think, slot machine empire. But a beautiful old building, somewhat dilapidated now, but it was the second location, as far as I'm aware, for what was originally the Belfast Children's Hospital and then the Ulster Hospital for Children and Women. She was appointed in 1938. It's gone to the wrong one. Isabel completed her training in Bournemouth. She qualified as a radiologist and was appointed as superintendent radiologist at the Royal Victoria Hospital in 1959. Isabel Margaret Dixon died at hospital on 14th July 1985, aged 77, and is buried in Mavilla Cemetery in Newtonards. Robert John McConnell was born on 15th February 1884 at Balmoral to William Clark McConnell, a land agent, and Mary Ann Boyd. He was educated at Bedford Grammar School in England and then at Queen's University, and served in the Great War with the Royal Army Medical Corps until invalided out of service in 1917. He was subsequently appointed as the resident surgeon at the orthopaedic branch of the UVF Hospital, which was located at Botanic Gardens and part of the Queen's University Belfast. So basically, if you're familiar with Queen's, the area behind the South Dining Hall, between South Dining Hall and Botanic Gardens, and to the side of the main building, was where part of the UVF Hospital was located. Robert was a surgeon at the Royal Victoria Hospital and the Ulster Hospital for over 30 years. He retired in 1952 and died at 62 Malone Road on 22nd July 1956, aged 72. And that, folks, is that.